What's your real-life story that nobody will believe? Story 1. I have had numerous wild animals approach me at random times with absolutely no fear. In college, I was walking through the woods between my dorm and the football field where I parked my car. There was a small clearing that overlooked the field where the track team was practicing. My roommate was a vaulter, so I stopped for a few minutes to watch and leaned against a tree. I had an apple in my purse, and after a while, I felt a gentle nudge. A fawn had come up and was sniffing through my bag. I stood perfectly still and let it explore while its mother watched just a few feet away. Very slowly, I reached into my purse, but the baby deer bounded away. I placed the apple on the ground and slowly walked off. Later that afternoon, when I passed through the woods again, the apple was still there but had clear bite marks on it. I have also been hiking and had squirrels and rabbits come right up to me without hesitation. Birds land close to me and never fly away. It is such a peaceful feeling, but because it only happens when I am alone, I never tell anyone. It feels like my own little secret that maybe I really am a modern-day Snow White. Story 2. I met a man online and fell in love. We were together for about 5 months and started making plans to meet in person. Before that could happen, he told me his sister had died in a car accident, so our plans were postponed. After that, he began to distance himself. I went to Baton Rouge with the Red Cross after Hurricane Katrina, and while I was there, I discovered I had been catfished. Out of anger and heartbreak, I spent a couple of days with another man I had met online, but he turned out to be a terrible person. When I returned home, I called the man who had deceived me. It turned out there had been no car accident, his sister was alive, and the story had been a desperate lie to delay meeting me. I eventually forgave him. I flew across the country, met him in person, and fell in love all over again. A few months later, I moved to be with him, and everything was perfect for a year. Then he got transferred for work, and even though he asked me not to, I followed him because I loved where we had lived and had a great job. 3 weeks later, he came to my apartment after work, crying, and told me he was getting married that weekend in an arranged marriage. 36 hours later, I watched him board a plane, and I have not seen him since. Tomorrow marks his 7th wedding anniversary. Story 3. Just after I turned 19, I was arrested and charged with an armed robbery I was completely innocent of. I spent 10 months in jail, 6 of which were in solitary confinement under SUIC watch. I had been celebrating my birthday at a resort hotel with my girlfriend at the time. That night, around 3 in the morning, the front desk was robbed by 2 people, one armed with a gun and the other with a knife. When we checked out at 11 that morning, we were questioned because we vaguely matched the height and weight descriptions of the masked robbers. Later that day, it was discovered that my girlfriend had used a stolen credit card to pay for the room, which I had no idea about. We were both publicly arrested on the sidewalk and taken to the state police barracks in handcuffs without being told what we were being charged with. We were taken to separate rooms and questioned for hours about the robbery, the same questions over and over again. She ended up being jailed for the credit card fraud, and I was released but told to return the next day for more questioning. When I did, I was taken to a back room, sat in a corner, and interrogated by 2 detectives who picked apart everything I said, looking for any detail that could tie me to the crime. They told me my girlfriend had committed the robbery and that I would go down with her if I did not cooperate. Being 19 and terrified, I believed them. I did not question the fabricated information they showed me, and after hours of intimidation and threats of 10 years in prison, I was close to confessing to something I had not done. 10 days later, 2 officers came to my door and arrested me for armed robbery. My girlfriend had been coerced into giving a confession implicating me as an accomplice. I was immediately placed in solitary confinement under 24-hour SUIC watch, waiting anxiously for a public defender. When one finally arrived a week later, I told her I was innocent. She rolled her eyes and said, "Are you kidding me?" I broke down crying, thinking my last hope was gone, and only then did she realize I was telling the truth. She said there was no defense against my girlfriend's confession, and I fell into such a deep depression that I had a psychotic break after months in isolation. The district attorney visited me periodically, offering plea deals 2 to 5 years if I confessed, or 10 if I fought the charges. but I refused to admit to something I did not do. 6 months after my arrest, I was suddenly woken up one morning and driven to the state police barracks. The district attorney met me in a back room and said, "We have determined through further investigation that you were not at the scene of the crime." I was furious and asked if that meant I would be released and the charges dropped. He hesitated and said, "No, we cannot release you without charges. It would look bad for us. But we can drop the robbery charges and replace them with interfering with an investigation. You will be out in less than 6 months." I demanded my lawyer, and after a heated exchange, I reluctantly agreed. I pled guilty to aiding and abetting the consummation of a crime after the fact and served 10 months total. A few months after my release, my girlfriend was freed, and we tried to piece together what had happened. Out of nowhere, the mother of the real robber found us and told us her son had confessed to her that he and a friend had committed the robbery. He had been fired from the resort 3 days before, needed money for drugs, and knew the perfect time, place, and methods to pull it off. She went to the police, but they refused to listen, saying they already had their culprits. We tried hard to find a lawyer willing to reopen the case, but no one would take it. Later, the district attorney who prosecuted us was investigated for intimidation and abuse of power in another case. And to this day, that is the only sense of justice I have ever felt about what happened to me. Story 4. I was in Mexico long past my visa allowance. I was supposed to stay only 90 days, but by the time this happened, I had been there for about 6 months. I was driving and passed a police car while going too fast, so I got pulled over. I should also mention that I was working illegally in Mexico at the time, and my work uniform and supplies were in the trunk. As I was pulled over and doing the whole license and registration routine, the officers asked for my visa. I told them it was at my house nearby and asked if I could go get it. At that point, I mainly wanted to be alone to make some calls and figure out what to do. They asked me if my visa would even be valid if I went to get it. Not wanting to lie and make things worse, I admitted that it was expired and asked what would happen next. They told me I would have to go to jail and then be deported. While one officer talked to me, the other searched my car and found my uniform, realizing I was working illegally. They began to get angry and made vague threats, saying I would get the same treatment that Mexicans get when caught working illegally in the United States. That was when I realized they thought I was American, and they had not noticed that my driver's license was Canadian. I told them I was from Canada, and instantly the mood shifted. Suddenly, they did not care about the visa anymore and started asking all kinds of questions about Canada, whether it was cold all year, if bears wandered the streets of Toronto, and other funny things. We talked for a while, and they seemed genuinely curious and friendly once they realized I was not American. After calming down, I asked again what they planned to do about my visa. They seemed apologetic and said unfortunately they had already called it in, so they had to take me to the station. As I was getting ready to follow them, they got a call on their radio. One of them ran back to my car and told me to get in, follow them, and not even think about trying to run. I had no idea what was happening, but I did as they said. We sped off, easily going over 100 in a 60 zone. About 2 minutes later, we arrived at the scene of a car bomb that had gone off near a restaurant, injuring, possibly killing several people. They jumped out and told me to wait in my car while they responded. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers came back, handed me my license, and told me to go home, not to get caught again, and to return to Canada as soon as possible. I stayed in Mexico another 8 months before I finally left. Story 5. My cousin and I, both 12 years old, loved climbing anything we could. One day we decided to climb onto the roof of a house. Everything went smoothly at first. We got up there, hung out, and bragged about how awesome we were for conquering what felt like a mountain. When it was time to get down, we had to drop and hang from the edge so our feet could reach the railing on the back porch. My cousin went first, did it perfectly, and made it look easy. Feeling confident, I followed. I slid to the edge, grabbed the roof, and dropped to hang, but my grip was not as strong as I thought. I slipped and landed painfully, one leg on each side of the railing. I rolled off to the right, hoping to land on the deck so I could curl up and cry in peace, but I hit my head on the grill instead. I ended up in the hospital because my lower area was completely black and blue, and a kind young nurse had to scan me to make sure there was no serious damage. Luckily, everything healed fine, and now I can actually laugh about it. Story 6. This did not happen to me, but to my grandmother. About 25 years ago, she wanted to immigrate to the United States from Thailand. To speed up the process of getting a green card, she needed to marry an American citizen. At the time, she was divorced and spoke very little English, but a friend introduced her to an American man who was secretly gay and had a boyfriend. She paid him an initial sum of money, and they went through with a fake marriage. After the process was complete, my grandmother finally received her green card. She was supposed to pay him the remaining amount after she got her citizenship, but just a few days later, her fake husband was suddenly stabbed to death by another man. The police immediately contacted my grandmother to inform her of her husband's death and told her she should call his family to break the news. She then had to call his parents, who had no idea she even existed, and tell them that their son had married a Thai woman and that he had been killed. My grandmother has lived in the United States ever since and never got the chance to pay him the rest of his money. Story 7. When I was 4 years old, around 1992 or 1993, my mom, dad, sister, brother, and I were driving back from South Dakota. We could not find a hotel the night before, so we slept in our Aerostar minivan. My parents barely slept, and the next day my mom was driving on the interstate when she began to drift off at the wheel. She crossed over the rumble strips on the left side of the road, woke up, overcorrected to the right, and the minivan turned sideways and began flipping at about 65 miles per hour. Right before this happened, my siblings and I had switched seats because my dad was going to read to me from the passenger seat while I sat right behind him in the middle row. None of us had buckled back up yet. During the crash, the back seat somehow flew out of the van, taking my brother and sister with it. I remember the moments before it happened, but not the actual crash. Somehow, I ended up in my dad's lap in the front passenger seat, and he held me there until the van stopped moving. The van came to rest upside down in the middle of the road. Both my parents were still strapped in, and my dad was still holding me while hanging upside down. He unbuckled, got out, handed me to a woman who had stopped to help, and went back to get my mom, who was still buckled in. She is paraplegic, so she needed help getting out. While helping her, he searched frantically for my brother and sister, but could not see them anywhere. He got my mom out of the van and was guiding her off the road when she realized the other two were missing and started to panic, yelling, "Where are they?" My dad looked down the road and saw my brother and sister walking toward us. They had been thrown clear of the van. My brother had a scraped nose and a few bruises because he had landed in the grass. But my sister was less fortunate. She had landed on the road, covered in road rash, and had shards of glass embedded in her wounds. My parents and I only had minor cuts and bruises. We were all rushed to the hospital and everyone survived. My sister had to undergo surgery on her arm to repair torn tendons in her wrist. We were unbelievably lucky to make it out alive. To this day, my parents and I believe that if my brother and sister had been wearing their seatbelts, they might have been strapped to the back seat that was ejected, and things could have been much worse. I have told this story to friends many times, and people never believe me until my parents confirm it and my sister shows them the scars. Story 8. I was camping with friends, and after unpacking and setting everything up, we left our bag of snacks, chips, granola bars, and the usual on the picnic table. While we were not paying attention, a group of raccoons jumped up and stole the entire bag. Oh well. Later that night, we were drinking around the campfire, definitely tipsy, and it had gotten pretty dark. We suddenly heard rustling sounds coming from the picnic table behind us, where our cooler was. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed toward it, assuming it was another raccoon. I did not turn the flashlight on because I wanted to surprise it. I pointed it as I approached and flicked it on, only to find that it was not a raccoon. It was a bear. Standing on its hind legs, it had opened our cooler and was digging through it. It looked straight at me, then calmly reached back in, grabbed our pack of hamburgers, and started running off. My drunken brain thought it was a great idea to chase after the bear, yelling, "Give me back our hamburgers." Somehow I startled it enough that it dropped the hamburgers and ran off into the woods. We ate those hamburgers the next day, and they tasted like victory. People never believe this story, but my wife and two of my friends were there and saw everything. Story 9. When I was 19, I traveled to China for a study abroad program but was told to leave because my visa was revoked due to the SARS outbreak. Not understanding visas or the seriousness of the situation, I decided to stay, and it was incredible. For 8 weeks, I walked from village to village through the foothills of the Himalayas, near Tibet and the Burmese border, in areas so remote that many people there had never seen foreigners before. I traveled with a few other naive college students my age. We slept in chicken coops, schoolhouses, and abandoned sheds. We hitchhiked, slaughtered a goat and a chicken for food, and met people who had never worn shoes and wore capes made of tree bark. I crossed a gorge at least 100 feet above a raging river on a bridge made entirely of vines. I ate fish heads and rice. We went into a river valley that had just gotten its first road the year before. We were supposed to hike out through a mountain pass, but heavy snow made it impossible, and when we tried to leave the same way we discovered that the only road out had been blocked because they had detonated the tunnel through the mountain. We hitchhiked up to the tunnel entrance and managed to convince the construction crew to let us pass. On the other side, the Chinese workers welcomed us like guests. We played guitar together, sang songs, though the only one we all knew was Baby Got Back, and then I slept in a giant toolbox that had been converted into a bed. Story 10. I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional family. I barely had any relationship with my father, and my mother was married to my stepfather, who was an alcoholic. My mother was codependent and became unpredictable when she drank, often throwing me out of the house. When I was 12, it happened again. I ended up wandering around the train station, completely lost, not knowing where to go or what to do. That was when a man approached me. He looked to be around 30 years old. I was just a scared kid, and somehow I followed him to his hotel room. Here is the unbelievable part: he did not hurt me. He bought me dinner, let me sleep safely, took me around the next day, and then disappeared from my life completely. I eventually went back home because I had nowhere else to go. To this day, I still cannot believe how lucky I was. That experience changed me. It made me realize that good things could still happen, even when my life seemed broken. It pushed me to work hard in school, to build a future I could rely on, and to value people who show kindness. Today, I have a PhD, a good job, and a wonderful home. The only things I am missing are a boyfriend and a cat. Story 11. I work in a lumber yard that sells just about everything needed to build a house. We also deliver materials using pickup trucks, dump trucks, and forklift trucks. One day, I was delivering a load of plywood and siding in a pickup truck to a new house being built in an already established neighborhood. When I arrived, I unstrapped everything and started unloading the siding into the garage. After carrying off a couple of sheets, I noticed a few people gathering around the truck. I thought it was odd but ignored it and kept working. A few minutes later, I looked up again. There were about 15 people standing around, just staring at me. I stopped what I was doing, confused and wondering if I was about to get jumped or something. I reached for my phone to call my boss in case I needed help, but then I realized who these people were. They were just neighbors, older folks, kids, parents, all curious about what was going on. I figured it was just a quiet neighborhood with nothing better to do, so I went back to unloading. Suddenly, I heard them start chanting, "Lumberyard guy! Lumberyard guy!" They were cheering me on as I worked. Completely stunned, I kept unloading while they applauded every sheet I carried. When I finished, I waved awkwardly, got into the truck, and drove back to the yard. My boss did not believe a word of it, and neither did any of my friends. It was one of the strangest, most surreal moments of my life. Story 12. It is not an over-the-top story, but it is one that means a lot to me, a beautiful and bittersweet memory that inspired me to write a screenplay about it. Last year, after a rough breakup, my ex and I met to talk things through and find closure. She was angry and I was a mess, but as the night went on, the tension faded. We ended up spending 14 hours together, walking, talking about life and where we went wrong, watching the tide at 3 in the morning, even hiding from friends in bars so they would not see us together. At some point, we decided to stay up and watch the sunrise. We had made so many promises during our relationship and failed to keep most of them, so we wanted to fulfill at least one. It was hard. We almost fell asleep on display chairs in a supermarket, but we stayed awake long enough to see the sunrise. I think deep down, we both knew that we were holding on to each other for the last time. We never kissed or got intimate that night, but we held hands and connected in a way we never truly had before. Walking away from her that morning, knowing it was the end, was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I wrote a screenplay about that night called Chasing Promises, and I hope to bring it to life someday. We do not talk anymore, and as far as I know, we are not on good terms, but I still hold on to that memory. Maybe she does too. Or maybe I am just still chasing those promises. What always gets me is that when we first met up, the first thing she said was, "I cannot stay long, so say what you have to say." Story 13. My story is long, and people often tell me it sounds too unbelievable to be true, but every word of it is. When I was in year 6, grade 5 or 6 for Americans, our school got a replacement principal who was absolutely cruel. She did not believe in mental illness and constantly bullied me because I suffered from selective mutism. Some girls in my class started bullying me too. I would skip entire weeks of school just to avoid them. The principal, who I will call the witch, locked me in dark closets, even though she knew I was terrified of the dark. Because I was missing school, she decided I had to attend something called the morning club, which started at 5 in the morning. I had to wake up at that hour every day and go there until I had behaved. It went on for about 3 months. I started comfort eating and went from 90 pounds at 5 feet 2 inches to 180 pounds, which made the bullying even worse. She often called me a lazy slob. I failed my exams, skipped the last day of school, and thought I was finally free. But no. When I went to secondary school, the witch had told them I was a troublemaker and should not be placed with anyone from my old school. I ended up in a class full of strangers, completely isolated. My old friends abandoned me, which broke my heart. Then came the incident. I hated gym class. I was overweight and uncomfortable in my body, so I used to skip Tuesdays, which were gym days. One week, my mom had enough and wrote a note saying I could not participate. She told me not to bring my gym bag since there was no point. When I got to class, another girl with a broken arm handed in her note at the same time. There were 2 gym teachers. They read her note and said she was excused, then looked at me and completely lost it. They screamed, "Where is your gym kit?" I froze, unable to speak, my selective mutism kicking in, which made them even angrier. Everyone in the locker room stared. The teacher dragged me out, yelling for 10 straight minutes while I tried not to cry. Then she forced me to put on old muddy clothes that did not fit and threw a tantrum because the size 5 shoes were too small for my feet. When she left me alone to change, I broke down crying and tried to call my mom, but the teachers came back and stopped me. In the gym, they made me run in circles while everyone laughed. When we had to pair up, I tried to approach my old best friend, but she completely ignored me like I did not exist. That was the last day I ever went back. The teacher later claimed I had chosen to leave and even paid witnesses to stay silent. My school called social services, convinced my mom had killed me and buried me in the backyard. After that, I was homeschooled for 4 years, but in reality, I was left alone all day and spent my time playing online games. I did not leave the house for those 4 years, and everyone truly thought I was dead. Last year, I finally went to college to get my secondary education. I get my results on the 21st of August. I have also lost 50 to 60 pounds since then. Story 14. 10 years ago, I managed to lock my keys and wallet in the car while the engine was still running, about an hour's drive from home. It happened at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. I called my wife from the station, but she couldn't come because we had a newborn and a 2-year-old at home. I had no one else to call. I was sitting on the ground next to my car, frustrated, when a man suddenly drove up and parked right next to me, which was strange because I was nowhere near the gas pumps. I was parked by a phone booth. I'm a shy person who rarely talks to strangers, but this man got out and started chatting away like we were old friends. He looked a bit odd, so I told him I wasn't in a great mood, explained that my keys were locked in my car, and said he should move along unless he happened to have a coat hanger. He said he didn't, but kept talking anyway. Then he mentioned that I had a nice car, which was weird because it was just a 10-year-old Ford Escort. He said his wife had the same car and suddenly checked to see if he had her keys with him. He did. Then he suggested trying her key in my lock because sometimes keys from the same model can work. He put the key in and it opened my door. Just like that. I thanked him, stunned. He smiled, got back in his car, and drove off without getting gas or anything. To this day, I still have no idea why he parked there or stopped to talk to me in the first place, but I was unbelievably lucky that he did. Story 15. It all started in high school when I was dating a girl I met during my sophomore year. We became completely wrapped up in each other. Both of us had rough childhoods, so it felt comforting to be with someone who understood. But we were too close, too intense, and too young for that kind of relationship. Things got toxic fast. She would lie and say she was pregnant to keep me from leaving, and we would argue constantly, sometimes even verbally abusing each other. Eventually, things ended after she cheated, and I finally decided I'd had enough. That's when things spiraled. At first, the breakup was hard for both of us, but I moved on and started seeing someone new. That pushed her over the edge. I'd go outside and see her car parked at the end of my street. I recognized her license plate. She keyed my car, threw eggs on it, and started threatening to accuse me of assault. She even began harassing the girl I was dating. This went on for a couple of months, and I figured if I ignored it, she'd eventually stop. Then the night before I turned 19, everything changed. I went home after spending the evening with my girlfriend, went to bed, and woke up the next morning to see messages on my phone saying that my girlfriend's house had caught fire overnight. Her family had barely escaped alive, but thankfully, they were all okay. Investigators said the fire started in the garage and was clearly arson, not some random accident. They asked if anyone might have a grudge, and my ex was the only person who came to mind. It was awkward dealing with my girlfriend's family, knowing who they suspected. I told myself my ex couldn't possibly be that crazy, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Later, I found out she had gotten my girlfriend's address from an old birthday invitation. Nothing was ever proven, but she made some smug comments afterward that made my stomach turn. The investigation eventually ended without charges, and she never did anything else after that. But everyone knew. Sometimes your gut just tells you the truth. We joke about it now, but even after all these years, it still chills me to think how close we might have come to something far worse. Story 16. I have always been what people call a baby whisperer. It is a strange and mostly useless talent, considering that I do not particularly like children. But for some reason, they all seem to love and respond to me. Years ago, I dated a girl whose sister had a little boy. He seemed like a well-behaved kid, but I later found out he only behaved that way when I was around. I eventually learned that I was his earliest memory, and even though I have not seen him in years, he still asks about me. The last time I saw him, he was around 3 years old, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I always thought it was just a coincidence that kids felt comfortable with me. But then, in my last relationship, it happened again. My girlfriend had a baby who only listened to me. She would sleep, eat, play, and calm down almost instantly when I was there. Hours of screaming could stop after just a few seconds of eye contact. Her development skyrocketed when I spent time with her. Better vocabulary, faster motor skills, even walking early. At her 18-month checkup, the doctor was stunned by how advanced she was. She was just shy of 20 months old, holding conversations with me in full sentences, counting, keeping rhythm, and following every instruction I gave her. Since then, I have noticed it with other kids too, ones who misbehave with babysitters or refuse to talk to anyone. They open up to me almost immediately, share things, and ask about me later. I do not know why it happens, but sometimes I feel like it must mean something, that maybe I have a purpose I have not yet figured out. Story 17. I once met a woman who claimed to be a Ukrainian princess placed in protective services during the 1980s and relocated to a tiny town in southern Oregon. Maybe she was just a strange old blind woman, but she had an enormous amount of money, like unbelievably rich, and spoke perfect Ukrainian. My dad was a taxi driver, and she was one of his regular passengers. She would call every week asking to be taken to a hair salon almost 50 miles away, and paid him extremely well for it. One day I happened to be with him when he got her call, and he told me the princess story on the drive. When we arrived, I met her for the first time. Wanting to be polite, I took her hand and kissed it. I was 16 and thought that was the proper way to greet royalty. She seemed overjoyed, grabbed both my hands, and began chanting and singing something in Ukrainian. Then she started to cry happy tears, and said it was a blessing that royalty gave to visitors and people of the land. Whether or not she was truly a princess, I will never know. But that moment felt magical, and I still tell the story because even if it sounds far-fetched, I know exactly what I saw and felt. Story 18. One of the first times I ever got drunk, I woke up late at night in the middle of an empty field and tried to sit up, but something was pulling on my head. My hair was tangled in something, and when I reached back, I realized it had been braided together with the hair of another girl I barely knew. Somehow, someone had braided our entire heads of hair together while we were passed out. I had to slap her awake, awkwardly explain the situation, and we spent half an hour unbraiding ourselves before going home. We never figured out who did it. Another time, I snuck into a massive concert in New York City featuring two of the biggest rock bands in the world that year. I hid behind an amp and slipped in through the roadie entrance, ending up in the front row, watching the Black Keys and the Foo Fighters for free, standing next to celebrities who never realized I was not supposed to be there. On another occasion, my parents left me and two friends home alone for a weekend, assuming their parents would supervise us. Their parents did the same, leaving us completely unsupervised. They also left us $100 for groceries, which we instead spent on two inflatable boats. We decided to paddle across an isolated bay to another friend's house using plastic shovels as oars. In the middle of our adventure, a lightning storm rolled in, apparently a side effect of a major hurricane further down the coast, but we were too far out to turn back. Against all odds, we made it across safely and tied our toy boats to an actual dock. Somehow we survived, and when I was a kid, I used to read books by the neurologist Oliver Sacks. One day I went to the library to look for his books, but the librarian said they did not have any, and that I was interrupting the man in front of me. He turned around, smiled, and said, "I was just here to drop off a bag of books all by Oliver Sacks," and handed them to me. Maybe it was just luck, but it felt like something much stranger than coincidence. Story 19. 2 weeks after my 27th birthday, I almost died. I was at work when I felt what seemed like mild heartburn, followed by a strange pain along the side of my jaw. I rubbed it, swallowed, and suddenly felt a pop near my heart. Then every heartbeat felt like molten lava burning inside me. The pain was unbearable. I went to the bathroom to catch my breath, but it only got worse. I could barely stay still from the agony. I called a friend who drove me to the emergency room. They did a chest x-ray, said it was not a heart attack, and shockingly sent me home without further tests, despite how much pain I was in. I was too out of it to argue. When I got home, I started getting violently sick. Every 10 minutes, I was running to the bathroom. After 2 days with no sleep and no improvement, I went back to the emergency room. This time, they checked my oxygen and found it was at 48%. That finally got their attention. I was so weak that I had aspirated, giving myself pneumonia on top of everything else. They performed a CT scan to check the pneumonia and discovered I had a leaking aortic aneurysm, the source of all the pain and chaos. I was immediately airlifted to a more advanced hospital. Doctors told my mother to call the family because they did not think I would make it. To make things worse, a massive storm hit during the flight, and the turbulence was so bad they could not tell whether I still had a pulse, terrifying my mother, who they had kindly allowed to fly with me. Against all odds, I survived. The doctors later told me my condition was something they usually saw in men over 60, not a healthy, active 27-year-old woman. Ironically, on my birthday, I had joked that 27 felt old, like the age when you stop goofing off and have to start taking life seriously. I did not realize how close I was to never seeing 28. Story 20. My entire family is part of the mafia, the kind that kills, extorts, and runs drugs. I will not say exactly where, but it covers a large region in one corner of the United States. When I was a child, I always felt something was off about my family. Even as a kid, I noticed things that did not add up. My father was murdered 3 months after I was born. A supposed friend betrayed him by revealing that my dad was carrying $250,000 to deliver somewhere. That same friend, who had known him since high school, lured him out under the pretense of helping with something, then shot him in the back of the head and took the money. That was how my life began. As I grew up, I noticed that we had endless money, but no one ever seemed to have a job. I had uncles who were not actually related to me, most of whom are now dead or scattered across the country. When I was 8, I even witnessed one of them kill another man. Whenever I asked questions, my family denied everything, but I knew better. By the time I was 16, they had to tell me the truth. They explained that our wealth came from all kinds of illegal businesses, drugs, loan sharking, and everything else you can imagine. My two surviving uncles are both professional enforcers. One was formerly in the Spetsnaz Special Forces, and the other grew up locally and had known my father before his death. Once they brought me into the fold, they started training me to run logistics. At first, it was small things, organizing, managing details, moving money, but now at 22, I run almost everything. The business has passed down through generations, my great-grandparents, then my grandparents, then my father, and now me. The family still runs like a well-oiled machine. I have never told anyone this before, but I needed to get it off my chest. Once I post this, I will delete this account and disappear again. Story 21, I grew up with extremely abusive parents. It was so bad that I am honestly lucky both of them were there, because one would usually stop the other before they went too far and killed me. Anything more than pancakes for dinner was considered a luxury. When I was 10, I was diagnosed with epilepsy, which made everything even harder. A few years later, I started drinking heavily and skipping more classes than I attended. One day I realized I wanted more from life than what I could ever have living in that house. So at 16, I packed up and left, moving 300 miles away to a place where I knew absolutely no one. I stopped drinking and focused on myself. With no friends to distract me, there were no parties, just work and determination. After a year, I went back to school, graduated high school, and tried to build a life on my own terms. When I was 19, I moved across the country with a boyfriend I had been with for 3 years, but we broke up soon after. 3 years later, I married one of his coworkers. That marriage didn't last long either. We were best friends who made the mistake of thinking it was love. We're still close, though. We have lunch every Tuesday, and on Wednesdays he comes over to play video games. After that marriage ended, I went to college. Now I live with my boyfriend of 4 years, and things are finally good. My family, on the other hand, is still completely dysfunctional, so I keep contact minimal. For example, my mom and sisters have a restraining order against my dad, who went completely off the rails 3 years ago. I don't need one since I live in another province. My mom still hosts family barbecues, but she has to pick up my middle sister's kids because that sister had an affair and destroyed the marriage of my mom's roommate. I talk to my mom once a week, but it's hard. She always tries to play the victim when talking about my dad, and it infuriates me. She forgets the times he had me on the floor, kicking me in the ribs, while she did nothing to stop it. He never even laid a hand on her, but she still tries to make herself the center of the story. I have a great job now, making about $12,000 more than my position usually pays, which feels like justice for everything I endured. I chose not to have kids and plan to stay child-free for life. My current boyfriend is amazing. He helped me heal in ways I didn't even know I needed. It took a long time to stop flinching when he reached for me, but I'm finally in a place where I feel safe, loved, and whole again. That's my life so far, and for once, I'm genuinely proud of it. Story 22. When I was 24, I was drinking at a small local bar. The owner, a big tough guy, was working that night and caught an underage kid drinking inside. The kid was about 18 or 19. The owner threw him out, literally tossing him to the ground multiple times because the kid kept resisting and mouthing off. The kid stayed outside with a friend, smoking and ranting about getting revenge. I decided to hang back and light another cigarette just to see what would happen. A few minutes later, I saw the kid storm off toward his truck with a determined look in his eyes. His friend followed, clearly panicking. Moments later, the kid came back with a pistol in his hand. There was no bouncer or anyone working the door, so I stepped between him and the entrance, trying to stay calm. I offered him a cigarette and started talking to him, trying to keep him distracted and de-escalate the situation. He was drunk and angry, but I managed to get through to him bit by bit. After what felt like forever, he finally handed me the gun. I looked at his friend, gave him a quick nod, and he immediately grabbed and restrained the kid while I rushed back inside. I locked both the front and side doors, told the owner what had happened, and called the police. They arrived quickly, but the kid was already gone. I still think about how differently that night could have gone. A drunk version of me somehow managed to talk down another drunk kid with a gun and possibly save a room full of people. No one I know now would believe that story, but I know what happened, and I know a lot of lives were spared that night. Story 23. When I was 16, I got heavily into smoking weed. I used to buy from a guy at my school, and one day, out of nowhere, he approached me with a knife claiming I owed him $600. I knew that was impossible. I had a low-paying part-time job, and there was no way I'd ever take that much weed without paying up front. I told him straight that I didn't owe him a cent, and that he was crazy if he thought I'd take 60 grams without paying. He just sneered and told me to watch out the next time I saw him, because I'd better be ready to pay then. About 2 weeks later, during summer break, he and 3 of his friends came after me. I tried to run, but they were fast, and I couldn't outrun them, so I fought back. People never believe this part, but at 16, I wasn't some scrawny kid. I was 6'3", weighed about 270 pounds, and had very little fat. I wasn't great at cardio since I smoked, but I was strong and knew how to fight. I took on all 3 of his friends like something out of a movie, throwing one into a wall, knocking out 2 of them cold, and hitting the last one so hard he stayed down. The dealer saw his friends get wrecked and pulled out his knife. I knew better than to fight someone armed, so I turned and ran again. I'd made it about a block when I heard a loud clatter, a scrape, and someone yell, followed by a heavy thud. I turned around to see one of my best friends who had just been skateboarding by standing there with his board in his hands. He had hit the dealer in the back of the head, knocking him completely unconscious. Talk about perfect timing. Story 24. I was at a party one night, feeling miserable after a breakup, when the most beautiful girl at my brother's school came over and asked what was wrong. I brushed it off, but she didn't give up. We ended up talking for hours. She even smoked me out. Though I didn't smoke back then, I wasn't about to say no to her. By the end of the night, I told my friends I'd make her my girl someday. 3 years passed, and I never saw her again. Then on the first day of orientation for my new job, I started chatting with a cute coworker who warned me to stay away from a certain employee who had the same name as that girl. I laughed it off as coincidence. It was a pretty common name. As I was leaving, who should walk in but the very same girl from the party? We locked eyes, both shocked. My general manager introduced us and asked if we knew each other. Trying to lighten the moment, I joked, "Unfortunately." The hurt look on her face stuck with me. I quickly apologized, saying I was only kidding, and we moved on. A few months later, we started dating. She had been through hell abuse, trauma, things no one should ever endure. We dated for a while, but eventually she cheated on me. I broke it off, though we hooked up a few times afterward, before I finally cut all contact for good. Not long after, the girl from work, the one who had warned me about her, started hanging out with me. Let's call her Sarah. She told me that she and my ex, whom I'll call Elizabeth, had been best friends once but fell out because Elizabeth was a pathological liar. Sarah and I dated for about 5 months, and at first things were great. She told me she loved me a little too early for my comfort and even talked about kids. One night I planned to take her to watch a meteor shower, but she canceled last minute and wouldn't answer her phone. On my drive home later, I saw her walking down the street with another guy at 2 in the morning. I didn't say anything, but the next day I asked what happened. She tried to guilt-trip me and acted offended that I would question her. When I told her I had seen her, she broke down crying and told me I was invading her privacy. We broke up soon after. Later, I met a mutual acquaintance who told me something wild. Sarah and Elizabeth weren't just similar. They were practically mirrors of each other. They used to be inseparable until they started sleeping with the same guys and became rivals. It hit me that I had just been the latest in a long list of shared boyfriends. Elizabeth eventually got arrested and fired for drug-related charges, and Sarah, last I heard, was on the verge of losing her job for workplace favoritism. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at the insanity of it all, but at the time I was just happy to finally be free of both of them. Story 25. When I was in 8th grade, I found out I had an older brother who was in the same grade as me, and even at the same school, but no one would tell me who he was. So I started treating everyone like they might be him, trying to make sure that whoever it was We'd already be close friends by the time I found out. This went on for 2 years. I spent so many nights crying, wondering who he was and why no one would just tell me. Finally, during my sophomore year of high school, I convinced my dad to tell me. He admitted that it was a half-brother on his side. He'd been a bit of a womanizer back in the day. When I found out who it was, I couldn't believe it. The guy was already one of my closest friends. My mom told me it wasn't my place to say anything, so I kept it to myself and continued being just his friend. I hung out at his house all the time. His mom knew the truth the whole time, which somehow made it worse. I finally decided I'd tell him senior year at Christmas. But when I told his mom what I planned, she just said she was sorry for everything. She waited until 3 weeks before graduation to tell him herself. 3 weeks before one of the biggest milestones in our lives. He called me that night, but I was already asleep. When I saw the missed call the next morning, I instantly knew why he'd tried to reach me. After that, things weren't bad between us. But it was weird. We hung out more, but it still felt like we were just friends instead of brothers. The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. We could have had an entirely different life growing up together if our parents had been honest. He wouldn't have had to grow up with a verbally abusive stepfather, and I could have had the brother I'd been wishing for since I was 7 years old. Story 26. When I was 16, I went rabbit hunting with some friends out in Ramona, California. One of my buddies was riding a 50 cubic centimeter mini bike around the property. He was heading down a dirt road toward the wooded area where we were hiding. My friend and I decided to jump out and scare him by shooting at him with pellet guns, aiming low, just trying to mess with him. It was a terrible idea. When we jumped out, I fired, and the pellet went straight into his leg and didn't come out. He crashed the bike, and we ran over to help him while the mini bike rolled into the brush. As we were trying to deal with his wound, we looked over and saw the bike and the dry brush around it had caught fire. Keep in mind this was July in East San Diego, during a drought with temperatures around 95 degrees. The fire spread almost instantly. We ran back to the house to wake everyone up and call for help, but we had to leave my injured friend behind because he couldn't walk. Once everyone was up and evacuating, we ran back to find him. He was gone, and the fire was now raging 60 feet up in the trees. I was terrified. I thought I had killed my best friend. Eventually, we were evacuated and questioned by police from a safe distance. Miraculously, the house didn't burn down, and the land actually flourished after the fire. But at 16 years old, being told that the San Diego Fire Department was billing me $248,000 for negligence was one of the scariest moments of my life. We got lawyers involved, and thankfully no one was prosecuted. The fire burned 150 acres, but no homes were lost. Still, it was a hard lesson to learn, and one I'll never forget. Story 27. When I was a supervisor at Walmart, I had to open my line because the store was overflowing with frustrated holiday shoppers. Everyone was tense and impatient, and I was just trying to help things move faster. I took a man out of pity because he looked especially angry about waiting. As he was loading his cart onto the belt, I told him, "Go ahead and load your items. I just need to do a quick override at the next register." I turned my key, entered my code, and it took less than a minute 45 seconds tops. When I came back, he immediately started yelling at me, saying I was ignoring him and providing terrible service. I tried to stay calm, but he kept ranting about how I should never leave a customer and that I was unprofessional. Mind you, I had just saved him from waiting in a 20-minute line. Then the woman I just helped overheard him shouting. She turned around and said, "Why are you yelling at this poor girl? Can't you see she's already stressed enough?" He snapped back. "She left her register. She clearly doesn't know how to do her job. Mind your own business." The woman shot back, "It is my business. She helped you skip the line, and this is how you thank her? You're a giant jerk." That's when he completely lost it and yelled, "And you're a dumb idiot. Get lost. This girl sucks at her job, and I'll tell her that if I want to." They started screaming at each other right there in the checkout lanes, so loudly that security came running. It turned into this ridiculous shouting match about whether or not I was good at my job. I finally had to step in and say, "Hey, break it up. Just pay for your stuff, and let's all act like adults." Security ended up escorting both of them out, mostly because the man wouldn't stop swearing. As the woman was leaving, she smiled and said, I still think you're great at your job, and winked at me. Honestly, that moment almost made the entire chaotic day worth it. Story 28. When I was a sophomore in high school, I visited a friend in Argentina. One night we acted like complete idiots and got caught trying to break into a car. The police showed up, pointed guns at us, strip-searched us, and threw us in jail. We sat in a holding cell for what felt like forever until my friend's dad came to bail us out and slipped the officers some extra cash to adjust the story. His family was wealthy enough to hire a team of lawyers who eventually got all the charges dropped. You'd think that would have been enough adventure for one summer, but nope. Right after that, we both caught swine flu. My friend's father was lifelong friends with Che Guevara's nephew, Taco Guevara, who happened to be a doctor. He took care of us until we recovered. Later that same summer, I traveled to Iran to visit my mom's side of the family. One day, I was walking around my grandmother's neighborhood with my cousin, taking pictures, and we ended up near a military base. A guard started yelling and gesturing wildly, and I thought he was angry that I was taking photos. My heart dropped. I didn't speak Farsi and was terrified we'd get arrested. My cousin, who knew a bit of the language, suddenly laughed and explained that the guard wasn't angry. He wanted us to take a picture of him. He climbed up onto the guard tower, posed proudly with his AK-47 raised over his head, and motioned for me to snap the photo. When I did, he climbed down, walked us back toward my grandmother's house, and through a mix of broken words and gestures, told us he was happy to meet tourists. He said he wanted us to know that not all Iranians were violent or crazy like the media made it seem. It was such a surreal moment standing there with this armed guard who just wanted to be seen as human. That entire summer was pure chaos, but it's one I'll never forget. I'm still trying to find that photo on an old computer, but it might be gone forever. Story 29. About 11 years ago, when I was 24, my roommate and I went to a 5 a.m. bar. I got way too drunk, and when we left around 2, I begged him to stop at White Castle. He snapped, saying, "If I stop, I'm leaving you." He did and actually left me there. After eating, I started walking home in my nice shoes, carrying only my phone and wallet since he had the house keys. After a mile, my feet hurt so bad that I called a cab, but they told me they couldn't pick me up unless I was at a residence. There weren't any houses around, so I stuck out my thumb and tried hitchhiking. Eventually, a young couple stopped. The first thing we asked each other was, "You're not going to kill me, right?" They laughed, dropped me off safely, and I tried knocking on my door, but my roommate was passed out. Locked out and stranded, I headed toward a filthy motel nearby. On the way, I ran into my old neighbor, 6 years older than me, who'd just gotten out of jail. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and he was wandering around trying to score meth. When I told him what happened, he didn't believe me and thought I was looking for drugs too. Out of nowhere, a car full of gang members pulled up, and my neighbor hopped in. He told me to come along, but I politely declined. I wasn't about to get dragged into that mess. I finally made it to the motel and got a disgusting room. I locked the door and passed out immediately. At some point, I dreamed that a dog was biting my crotch until I woke up and realized a prostitute was giving me a blowjob. She looked like Wendy from Breaking Bad. Still half drunk, I made eye contact and mumbled, "Don't stop." She said she'd keep going for $30. In my haze, I actually thought about it, then decided to walk to a nearby ATM 3 blocks away. Halfway there, reality hit me. I needed to get my key deposit back and go home. I returned and told her to leave. As I was gathering my things, the motel manager, a small, furious Asian lady, burst in and yelled at me for having a prostitute in the room. I tried to explain that she had broken in and started on her own, but even I didn't believe my story. The manager glared at me and demanded that I leave immediately. I paid my bill, stumbled home, and swore to myself that no one would ever believe what happened that night. Story 30. My partner is 6 years older than me, and our lives somehow kept overlapping for decades before we finally met. He was born in Alaska, and I was born in New York. His military family moved to the Philippines when he was a toddler and returned to the U.S. right after I was born. They settled in Arizona while my family moved to New Mexico. About 5 years later, both our families moved again, his to eastern Washington, mine to the same general area, just a couple of hours apart. He graduated high school and college while I was still in grade school. Then his family moved to southern Indiana, and mine moved to central Kentucky once again, about 2 hours apart. We even both spent 2 years in dorms during the early 2000s before returning home around the same time. Him to Indiana, me to Kentucky. He moved back to Washington the same month I graduated high school, and a few months later, I moved to that very same city for college. After a few years of unknowingly living near each other, we finally crossed paths at a local call center. Ironically, we'd both worked for another call center before that, but never met there. At this new job, he was assigned as my trainer, and something just clicked. After circling each other around the country for over 20 years, we finally met, and we've been inseparable ever since. We've now been together for more than 5.5 years without spending a single day or night apart. I've always struggled with physical and mental health issues that most people don't understand, but he does, because he's lived through the same struggles. We share every interest, every quirk, every outlook. We spend every waking and sleeping moment together, taking care of each other in ways neither of us had ever experienced before. His father once told me that the only person who truly understands our kind of connection was his late wife, my partner's mother. Everyone else thinks we're crazy, but for the first time, we've both found something that feels like faith. We believe in soulmates now, or maybe even reincarnation, because it feels like we've known each other far longer than this lifetime. After everything we've both been through, we're convinced our paths were meant to cross. There's no other way to explain how two lives could keep orbiting one another for decades until they finally collided. Story 31, when I was a kid in the late 1980s or early 1990s, my mom and her then boyfriend, now my stepdad, used to hang out with a group of coworkers on weekends. They'd all meet at this local pizza place that served beer and had a little arcade. Since everyone was working class and didn't want to pay babysitters, they'd just bring their kids along, me included. Those nights were actually fun. Everyone knew everyone, and it felt like a little community. Among that group was a woman named Janice, who became my mom's best friend, and her boyfriend Bob, who also worked with them. Things went on like that for a while: pizza, beer, laughter, the same familiar faces every weekend. But one night, my mom was out in town and happened to see Bob. She was going to say hi until she realized he was with another woman, and then she saw him kiss her. Torn between loyalty to both of them, my mom eventually told Janice the truth. Janice broke up with Bob right away, but Bob didn't take it well. He started stalking Janice. It got so bad that she had to move out of state to get away from him. That might have been the end of it, except Bob figured out my mom was the one who told her. Then he turned his obsession toward us. He slashed my mom's tires, made threatening phone calls, and followed her. The police said there was nothing they could do without proof. We eventually moved to try to get away from him, but my stepdad still worked at the same place as Bob, and we think Bob must have followed him home one night. Our new house was small. My room was in the front, facing the street, and my parents' room was in the back, facing the yard. One summer night, I was lying in bed when I heard a few popping sounds outside like fireworks. I didn't think much of it until something smashed into my window and hit my metal blinds. The glass didn't shatter, but I heard the impact and saw the blinds bend inward. I froze. If those blinds hadn't been there, whatever came through would have hit me square in the head. I didn't know what it was, just a small hole in the glass, not even enough to wake my parents. I was 12 and more worried they'd think I broke something than that someone was shooting at us. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house and looked outside. My mom was standing by her car with the police. When I went out, she was visibly shaken. The driver's side of her car, facing the street, had 4 perfect bullet holes lined up from front to back. That's when it hit me. I ran back to my room and checked the window again in daylight. There was the small hole in the glass, and one of the metal slats from the blinds was warped and torn near the hole. When I looked down, I found tiny fragments of a bullet lodged between the carpet and wall. My mom was right, it was Bob. The police couldn't prove it, but we didn't need any more convincing. We packed up and moved that very day. To this day, I still think about that night. A paper-thin strip of metal from those old tin blinds is probably the only reason I saw my 13th birthday. People always tell me there's no way those blinds could have stopped a bullet, but I saw it myself. Maybe it hit at the perfect angle. Maybe the distance slowed it down. Maybe it was a hollow point that fragmented. But honestly, I can't help but think there was something more. Divine intervention, luck, fate, call it what you will, but something saved me that night.